Welcome to the Humans Against Poor Scholarship Summer Grant Interviews. Each one of our interviewees is competing for a $2,000 grant to help fund their summer research. Do you want to have a say in who gets funded? Become a HAPS donor today by visiting www.hapsfund.com/donate.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next round of the HAPS interviews. We're really glad that you're here joining us today. I'm Sarah. I am a librarian at Hamilton College, and I am filling in for Megan to help interview some of these potential scholarship recipients. For those of you who have not been on the channel before, I was one of the first recipients of this scholarship, so I am thrilled to be joining you all every year in some of these interviews. So if you don't know what HAPS is, there's a link scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I encourage you to check it out and learn more about the great work the scholarship does. With that, let's jump in and get our first guest going. Hi, welcome. Could you start off by telling us a little bit about who you are, what you study, and what you're hoping to do this summer?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Yuval. I'm from Israel, where the time is actually 7 p.m. So good evening, everyone. And I'm a PhD student in biblical studies at Bar-Ilan University, and I'm studying also Assyriology at the Hebrew Bible at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Forgive me, therefore, for my English. And I'm very interested in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible for itself, especially biblical narrative, biblical law, wisdom literature. And when I began my master's degree, I studied Akkadian, and then I found out the rich world of the ancient Near East, and I just realized that you cannot understand the Bible without truly understanding the context of the Bible, its environment, its neighbors. So today I find myself dealing with Mesopotamia and with kind of text that I didn't know until like 3 years ago. These very weird texts like lexical text and divinatory text and the extispicy and anything in this kind. And when I found out about this program about the Humans Against Poor Scholarship, I was really glad, because actually for the last 2.5 years or so, I had the opportunity to instruct an online course about the ancient Near East. We call it MOOC, Massive Open Online Course, and it's available on edX for those of you who know it. And we have a lot of students. Actually, we have more than 1,000 students every year, and from all around the world. Many of them are from Arab countries, and so it happens that I sit in Israel and I talk with people from Egypt and Jordan, and also Iraq and Iran, and it's really amazing. And I deeply identify with this goal of the Humans Against Poor Scholarship to make the knowledge of the ancient Near East accessible to everyone. And that's in a hinge. And my main focus, my plans for the summer are to focus on two projects. One of them is in the field of law, and the second is in the field of prophecy. And in the field of law, I deal mainly with Mesopotamian law collections, where the most famous of them is the Laws of Hammurabi, after which is named the Digital Hammurabi. And I deal with biblical law and the Book of Exodus. And wait a minute. I'm looking into all kinds of legal topics. Among them, sorry, there are knocks on the door, so
Yeah,
about
right.
me. Yeah, I deal with the very interesting topic of sexual offenses, both in the Bible and in the Mesopotamian law collections, and with the topics of physical injuries and all kinds of parallels. So actually, what I'm doing is both dealing with Assyriology by itself. I'm dealing with the cuneiform text and studying them, and then goes to the second phase of finding the parallels and making the comparison. And a very interesting project that I'm working on right now is parallels between the Mesopotamian law collections and the Mishnah, which is the legal corpus of the rabbis from the early Judaism. And it's very interesting because the Mishnah was probably transmitted into writing in the 2nd century AD, which is like 2,000 years after the laws of Hammurabi, for example, and more than 2,000 years after the first law collections, which were written in Sumerian, which is an ever more ancient language. And it's amazing that you find sometimes exact parallels between the laws of Hammurabi and the Mishnah. And you really ask yourself, how can it be? How did it went from here to there? What kind of continuity we find here? And it's a unique phenomenon, I think, that demands an explanation. So I think this is one thing that I'm doing this summer and doing for a couple of months now in the field of law. The second project that I'm working on is in the field of prophecy. We all know the prophecy from the Bible, the literary prophets, that is Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so. And in Mesopotamia, it's a bit tricky because we have actually two kinds of prophets or prophecies. We have what we call oracles, like we find prophets that goes to the king and say to him, "Do not fear, I am the goddess Ishtar, and I stand by you, and you will win and conquer the lands," and so and so. And these are oracles because we can see that there was a figure of a prophet or a prophetess that stood and gave a speech at some point in a very particular place and situation. And these are called the oral prophecies. And we have another group of texts which we call the literary prophecies. And this is very small group. We have, for now, 5 known texts of that genre. And so these texts, they do not have a specific setting in life. They just they are attributed to some authoritative figure, maybe a god. I mean, one prophecy is attributed to Marduk, which was the main god of Babylon and the head of the pantheon when Babylon was in political significance. And he has this prophecy. He says, like, I am Marduk, I went to Hatti, I was there in exile, and I know that there is going to be hardship in the land, and there will be an evil king which will do so and so, and in the future I will raise a righteous king, will bring back justice, and the people will be happy, and so and so. So in my master thesis in Assyriology, I'm actually preparing a new edition for this text, the Marduk prophecy, and I'm really happy to work on it. And I'm also dealing with other prophecies of the same genre. Very interesting one kind of a prophecy is the Uruk prophecy, which is 1,000 years later than the Marduk prophecy. And this is from the city of Uruk in the south of Babylonia. And this is very interesting text because Uruk, it was written about in approximately the 5th century BCE, where Uruk and the whole of Babylonia was under Persian domination. So there was no Babylonian kingship. So they were under foreign conquer. But in this prophecy, they speak about the kings of Babylon and the kings of Uruk, and they're like fantasizing about world domination of their own kings, and it was like the most unrealistic thing to think about at that time, and it's actually reminiscent of the Hebrew Bible, where you found the dreams about the kingship of David, the future king, the Messiah, maybe. So I think it's a remarkable parallel. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Awesome, thank you. And we already have some questions about all this fascinating research that you're planning to take on this summer. Our first one is, you mentioned a lot of different kinds of parallels. Do you think these parallels are the result of direct transmission or a common cultural background?
Well, of course, you have to look into each case on its own. I mean, there are kinds of parallels that you gotta say that they are literary. I mean, maybe in the field of law, I think for my part that many of the parallels are literary. I mean, one text knew the other text, and it's not only between parallels, I mean, like the Hebrew Bible and the Mesopotamian law collections, but between the Mesopotamian law collections themselves. I mean, if you have the laws of Hammurabi and the laws of Eshnona, and you find parallel between them, so in my opinion, you gotta say that this is a literary parallel. One text knew and drew on the other text, and that is my opinion. But you know, scholarship is very wide and rich, and there are a lot of opinions. And I think it's gotta be, the answer must be based on philology, and that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, if the parallels are very close linguistically and in terms of content, then it's more probable that the transmission was direct. And also in the case of the prophecies, and that's I mean, it's a wide question. Yeah, I mean, the main point is that Israel was part of the ancient Near East, and every part of the ancient Near East was part of its wide world, and the traditions were moving from here to there, either orally or literally, and sometimes the traditions go through changes, and this is actually the interesting point of comparison. Not only the similarities, but also the differences.
Yeah, and that I'm glad you brought up that last point, because that opens up a question that I had from something you mentioned very early on, that you can't really understand the Hebrew Bible without the context of the ancient Near East. And I was hoping you could say a little bit more about that, because for a lot of people, you know, the Hebrew Bible is, you know, it's a sacred text, it's a religious text, but also it's a historical text. It's a text from a specific time period. And I think you bringing up that point is really important.
Yeah, so you know, for thousands of years, we had only the text of the Bible, so we had no knowledge of its context and now today, for the last I don't know, 2 centuries, we have the knowledge of archaeology and the ancient languages that were connected to biblical Hebrew, which I mentioned Akkadian, and there is also Aramaic and Ugaritic, and also there are words from Sumerian, which is not even a Semitic language, but we have actually words in the Bible that had their origin in Sumerian. And sometimes, so we have all these channels that illuminate our understanding of the Hebrew Bible in the terms of archaeology. So we have historical texts from the ancient Near East that shed light on events that are described in the Bible, in the historical books mainly, but also not only in the fields of history, but also in traditions like the traditions of the creation and the flood traditions in plural, because we find them in texts that are very ancient, much more ancient than the Hebrew Bible. So let me say the direction of influence, if it is influence, not influence, the hierarchy of the data is clear, because we have first the ancient Near East and then the Bible, and then maybe we have some later sources like 🀭 in the Greek world, but the main Mesopotamian sources are much ancient than the sources of the Hebrew Bible. Yeah, I forgot what the question was.
No, that was great. I was mostly just interested in having you tie together these Bible and Assyriology interests, because for a lot of people, this is new information. I did want to ask you about your MOOC, your course. Will you be doing that this summer? Is that just something that you do in general?
No, I didn't understand. Didn't hear you.
So the online course that you teach, is that something that will also be happening this summer, or is it something that happens in other parts of the year?
Yeah, it was during the semester. So now we're in the middle of the semester. So I think it will take place until the end of June. It's still open. I mean, everyone can join it. It will be very nice. I did not build the course. I'm just instructing it now. No, it's of my teacher, Nida Summit, if you know her. She planned the course and built it, and I'm just inheriting it in a way, maybe. Assisting more than inheriting. Yeah.
I feel like every student who's TA'd or taught or inherited a course knows what you're talking about there.
Yeah, so no, it's really, I mean, the comparison between the Hebrew Bible and the ancient Near East is so wide, and it goes through so many fields. I mean, in the field of creation, traditions, and flood, and law, which I talked about, and prophecy, and wisdom literature, and love literature. I mean, the Song of Songs and Akkadian love literature. The comparison is really fascinating, and it's just striking. You find the same lines of thought and expressions, and also because both Hebrew and Akkadian are Semitic languages, it is actually the same expressions, the same words, the same forms. Sometimes, not always. Yeah.
Well, close enough. Of these fascinating comparisons, these things that you were just talking about, this might be a hard question, because I know we end up loving our scholarship a lot, all parts of it. But which comparison has been the most striking to you? Which similarity has held your attention?
Wow. Well, I gotta say something that is less famous from the field of love literature. and there's this verse in the Song of Songs. The Song of Songs is a conversation between two lovers, female and male, and they always have their troubles. I mean, they want to love each other, but they can't. Sometimes they gotta escape all these kinds of things. And there's one verse, I think it's chapter 5, verse 1, maybe. No, it's not one. I don't remember the verse. It says, I am sleeping, but my heart is awake.
Mhm.
And it's a really powerful simile, because it's like, I really love you, but I cannot show it for now. Or there's anyone can take it to any direction wishes. And the same expression is found in Akkadian text, which was published only in 2016. It's very new, actually, its publication, and it has the same expression. I am sleeping, but my heart is awake. Well, the difference is that in the Song of Songs, the speaker is the female, and in the Akkadian text, the speaker is the male. Most probably, because it's difficult in Akkadian to understand the gender, but that's what it seems like, that it is the male. That's it, a small point.
Wow, that was a new one to me. I hope that was a new bit of information for those of you watching along at home. Unless there are any more questions from the chat, we can give you a chance to. Okay, we do have some questions in the chat. All right, so you have it up on the screen. Why is it that the name for Song of Songs uses the Sumerian word for song instead of the Semitic word shir?
No, I'm not sure I understand, because in Hebrew we do say shir hashirim.
I guess maybe the commenter can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like what it's getting at is you mentioned that Sumerian is not a Semitic language, and yet it appears to be.
Well,
not Semitic word.
Sumerian is sitting maybe in the foundations of the Akkadian language. So we have, because the scribal education of the Akkadian speakers was based on the knowledge of Sumerian in the beginnings of the Babylonian civilization, if you can say so. The main goal of scribal education was the knowledge of Sumerian. Sumerian was the sacred language, like Latin or ancient Greek in later times. So they really venerated Sumerian. So many Sumerian expressions and words found their way into Akkadian and subsequently into the Bible, I guess, into the Hebrew language, not only to the Bible. So maybe share is one of them. I don't know if you say so. I know I have one example in mind. It's a famous example. In Hebrew, we have this word adrichal, which is a building planner. In modern Hebrew, and in the rabbinic Hebrew, it was something else, but not far removed from that. And adrichal, it's actually warad ekalim in Akkadian, and ekal is equivalent to Hebrew heichal, and ekal is in Sumerian. Is house, gal is great. So the great building, the great house, the great temple. and Warad Kalim is the slave of the temple, or the palace maybe, or the temple, I think.
Yeah, so everyone in the chat, the concept of this class that you're teaching is really blowing up. People want to know where they can find it.
Yeah, so the MOOC is on edX. edX is a very famous platform. It has these great courses in various topics. Our course is called The Bible in Light of the Ancient Near East. So it's very straightforward, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, we also have a Hebrew version, but I guess the English is more relevant now.
All right, so we'll have this be your question. We'll let you go. Can you give examples of themes or thoughts that have origins in the ancient Near East and predate the Bible besides the flood story?
Well, we also have the creation, of course. The topic of law, I think, is really striking because we have bodies of law literature. I mean, only this thought. I mean, it's not. This is really. It's a topic that is difficult because ancient law, I mean, Mesopotamian law is not similar to modern law, and also biblical law is not the same as modern law. It's not legislation in the modern way. But this is why I specifically say law collection and not law codes or something like that, because we don't know actually what are the law collections. We only know that these are collections of legal cases, of legal verdicts, and the way they are articulated is more representative of a theoretical way of thinking than actual cases. And I think that they represent something that is close to scientific way of thought. I mean, it raises theoretical cases and elaborates on them, and then gives variations of them. I mean, it gives a case, and then it gives the opposite case. I mean, if maybe I can give an example. A good example, which is also an example for a parallel to the Bible, is the case of a goring ox and a bull that gores a man and kills a man. And it says, like, the first law says, if an ox is goring a man, then you must pay so and so. But if you did not warn its owner, then the punishment is so and so. So it has like this. It takes these opposites. If the owner was warned, and if he wasn't, and then if the ox was I don't know, was guarded, was in the garden, and if it was in the street. And the same case occurs in the Bible in Exodus 21. It's a very striking parallel and the famous one. It has many studies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are about right at time, so I will let you go. Thank you so much for joining us, Yuval. We hope you get to do everything that you want to do this summer.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, it was a pleasure.
Awesome, thank you. And because we're just going to keep right on rolling and invite our next guest on to be interviewed. Welcome to the interview. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you're studying?
Okay, sure. Hi, my name is Samaria Devine, and I am originally from Liberia, West Africa, but I've lived in the United States for a pretty long time at this point. I study Hebrew Bible primarily, but also some African traditional religion. I'm at the University of Georgia, and I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate. So my general research interests just around how African culture and African society can give us more information or shed light on what we read within biblical texts. And so my current project actually focuses on how colonization and the process of colonization in Nigeria can help us understand biblical kings and the sometimes terrible policies that they implemented that might not be as transparent because biblical writers, for whatever reasons, might skate through or brush past some of the policies that they implemented. So I'm focusing on Solomon and Josiah. More than likely for my dissertation, it would primarily be Solomon, and then I'll add some Josiah stuff, hopefully later on in life. But yeah, that's where I am at this stage.
Awesome, fascinating. Sounds like a super cool project. Is that what you're hoping to work on this summer, or is there sort of a bit of that you're hoping to tackle specifically over the summer?
Yes. So over the summer, I hope to write like my life depends on it, because I feel like it does. But especially because over the summer, I don't have teaching responsibilities, which is nice because that frees up a lot of time so that I can write and work on my dissertation. But also because I don't have teaching responsibilities, I don't get summer funding. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish. I think the HAPS fund will really help me, just sustain me while I do the writing. Also, I am going to the International Society of Biblical Literature conference. And so while there is some funding that's available for that, I think the HAPS fund will also help with defraying costs that I might not have anticipated, or things that might come up.
Yes, and for those of you who've watched HAPS interviews before, you know this is a really common theme, but unfortunately this is the way it is. So many PhD students, you're told, work on your research, present your research, but then funding to go do that. Any part of that can be hard to find. It's an unfortunate story, but that's why we're all here.
Yes, absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you about this, looking at this African sources, specifically the Nigerian sources. What exactly are those sources? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're looking at? Is it text? Is it archaeological? Something like that.
Yes, so it is primarily text. So where I'm starting from, I'll give the example of Solomon, since that's what I'll mostly be working on with my dissertation. But in 1 Kings 4, we see like a list of districts that Solomon has governors over, and those districts don't necessarily align with tribal boundaries that we have seen before in the text. And the biblical writers kind of skate over that. They say these are the districts and these are the governors over them, but then everything was so successful under Solomon. And so when you look at the history of Nigeria and you see how partitioning really wreaked some havoc, it kind of set the foundation for what later would be the Nigerian Civil War. And so when you look at the context of Nigeria and you see the impact that partitioning, especially with no regard to existing boundaries, had, that kind of makes you think critically of Solomon. And it makes you go, okay, I know the biblical writers don't say much about this, but there has to be more going on here than, oh, these were the district governors and everything was so successful. And so I'm looking at the period from right before 1900. So I'm starting with the Berlin Conference of 1884, and I am primarily looking at text. So just the history of the Berlin Conference, which many believe legitimized the partitioning of Africa. And then how Nigeria developed as a state after that, and the policies that were implemented that are sometimes similar to those that Solomon implemented, and how it eventually led to the Nigerian Civil War in 1967 to 1970.
Wow, awesome. And so it's something that I find super interesting, looking at these more contemporary sources informed by these very ancient sources. It was a theme that came up in the interview right before this, how we see so many parallels, things keep repeating over and over again.
Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say briefly that that's primarily why I chose colonization. I think we're all in 2023 pretty familiar with the impact of colonization. So, Solomon's time we're far removed from Solomon's time. But if we can compare his policies to something that we understand, and just highlight the enormity of his practices through colonization, I think it's helpful in having us understand, hey, this is a big deal. I know the biblical writers don't highlight it. It's not as transparent, but this is a huge deal. It's something to look at critically.
Yeah, definitely. And I can see so in our little private chat over here, I can see Megan and I had the same question. I guess we're all scarred by our grad school experiences in some way or another. But this sounds incredibly cool, incredibly new and productive. So have you had any pushback from other academics?
Okay, so not yet, but I think that's one of the reasons why I want to do the international SBL, because I think it'll push me. So right now I've talked about this with other African biblical scholars, so there is support there, but then also with my advisor who, thankfully won't outright say, hey, don't do this, but will have conversations with me and push me to, improve it. But I'm looking forward to the international conference because I think it will challenge me a lot. I will probably receive pushback from other academics, but hopefully constructive feedback that helps me to strengthen my argument.
That's a very nice way to put it, and I hope you get that as well.
Thank you.
And so now I'm curious because you keep bringing up such interesting things. Yeah, you mentioned there's a community of African biblical scholars. Will you be able to connect with them at this conference?
Yes. So thankfully, there are a few here in the U.S. Who I have connected with through SBL, and just through my previous educational experiences. So I will connect with a few more that I haven't met, and so that's what I'm looking forward to, I think, the most. Yeah. But with the African scholars who were here, they also do a lot of post-colonial work. And so there is this, there's support, but there is kind of this expectation like, hey, if you're going to do this, you're going to put this out there, we want to make sure that it's as excellent as it can be. So maybe a spirit of mentorship, I should say, is what exists in that community.
Awesome. Those of you watching at home, please don't forget to put questions in the chat because I have a ton of questions and I'm happy to keep asking them. But I'd rather hear from you if you have any questions. So I'm going to take you back to the beginning, a little bit of the basics. How did you first get started in biblical studies?
Okay, so actually, for undergrad, I was a business major and I worked in corporate America. So let's start all the way there. So this was not my intention, but as I was working in corporate America, I just realized, because I grew up in the church, that there's a bit of biblical illiteracy. And so I'm like, I just want to pursue this. I want to know more. And while I was working on my master's, I fell in love with Hebrew Bible. And I saw a lot of similarities between what I was reading in the Hebrew Bible and how I grew up. And so I figured, okay, this is a lens to look at the Hebrew Bible through. You are familiar, there's, just as an example, the Sotah in Numbers. There's this whole text about, a woman and she has to drink this poison. And it's similar to something that I grew up hearing. And so I figured this would be a beautiful lens to look at the Hebrew Bible through. How can this inform? And so once I pursued the PhD, I did a paper actually on Josiah and how centralization is similar to colonization because it suppressed traditional religious practices, and this project has just kind of formed from that.
Wow, fascinating. And I think, people have past lives before academia. It often inform how you also just approach research in general. And so having this, this business background, but also personal experience in the church, how do you think that's affected how you approach your research questions?
Yeah. How I approach my research question. I think most importantly, accessibility. So I want this Solomon stuff, right? So my critique of Solomon, I want it to be so accessible. And I think that's why I'm choosing to look at it through the lens of colonization. I want someone who isn't necessarily within academia to be able to look at this stuff and understand the point that I'm trying to make. And that stems from my background in the church, because I know a lot of people won't have the privilege to pursue PhD work, but they might have the interest. And so with everything that I do, with all the research that I do, I hope that it's accessible. I hope that the language is accessible. I hope that the concepts are easily digestible, so that anybody can read them.
Awesome. Love that goal here at Digital Hammurabi. So it looks like we have some audience questions for you. We're ready to turn on the screen. I think. Yes. So this seems just more like, so I'll read it out loud for accessible reasons. Samaria, stick to your guns. We've ignored Africa's role in formation of major religions far too long, and definitely ignored the role of colonization. Yes, I think everyone agrees with you there. So follow-up question, are you looking at Africa's role in forming the Bible or the Bible's role in the colonization of Africa?
Okay, so more the Bible's role in the colonization of Africa. So I wanted to do Solomon and Josiah because of time and the energy that goes into my dissertation. I probably won't get to the Josiah piece, but that is largely like, okay, how does the Bible play a role in the colonization of Africa? Particularly, how does it suppress African traditional religion? So I know even our day and time, you hear people on TV or wherever in media saying things like, you know, that's witchcraft, or this is witchcraft. And a lot of that traces back to how the Bible was introduced in Africa. And so I will be looking at the Bible's role in the colonization of Africa, but not so much Africa's role in forming the Bible, at least not yet. There's a whole lot of research out there to be done. So I'm sure at some point I'll have to engage with that.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of time for that, and definitely more to explore. And so our next question is, which is the best place to learn the African history and culture?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think because Africa is so large, it's hard to say, right? So I know for me with Liberian history, I think it's important to talk to people on the ground to see, you know, what information they might have. But thankfully, there have been a lot of books that have been preserved. So I think what I would say is go country by country, which will take a long time because within each country, there are so many languages, so many people groups. But take a little chunk and go deep into that chunk. Probably with books and articles, I would say. I hope that's helpful. It's such a hard question. I wouldn't expect that.
Yeah, that is a really broad question. Also, like, there are a lot of, you know, researchers, but also artists and whatnot who have deep roots in Africa, who are also here in the US, who are putting installations, writing books. So it's like, and they mentioned a lot of history. And so if you're looking for specific things like the Berlin Conference of 1884, you don't know, and that's the first time you've heard that, maybe you're hearing it in art and you can find deep dives into these sources.
Yeah. Also, something I find interesting would be like the myths from different ethnic groups, because they just give you insight into how people were thinking about, you know, creation or God or Earth. So myths, that's probably a really good place to start as well.
Yeah, I think we were just talking about how these stories exist across cultures, and they're the same and in remarkably like specific ways, and it's really cool to trace those lineages.
Very cool.
Let's see, do we have any more audience questions? Oh, great. I mean, I think you all are missing an opportunity because I have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to keep asking mine. So you recently became a PhD candidate? Is that what?
So exactly a year now. So
Okay.
as of last May, I became a PhD candidate. Yeah, so I've been working little by little on this, and I think I'm at a place where I can make I can make major headway on the project.
Nice. So you're starting to come to this point where you're like, okay, I can start to say some things and maybe start to trace some of these lines. Is there a point in your research that you found where maybe you're not ready to make any big claims, but you're like, this is a really promising avenue and I can't wait to jump into it?
Interestingly, the Nigerian history portion. So to the question that we had, it took me, I had a general idea, but one, I'm not from there. It just so happened that this was the country that I think gave me the best chances for the case that I was trying to make. So that took a very long time. And even though I can't share every single thing that I've read, I now have a whole lot more knowledge. So it took several months for me to really get the history under my belt and make sure that it aligned with what I was trying to do, and also to give it the opportunity to steer me in other directions. So you kind of come to the table thinking, I know what this is going to be. There won't be any surprises. And guess what? There are surprises. And you just kind of have to let the research lead you.
That's great advice, especially if there are any grad students out there. You put it together a dissertation proposal and then you realize how quickly it falls apart just because you're doing the research and things lead you where you don't expect them to go.
Yeah.
Looks like we have some activity in the chat. I'm not sure if we have any questions. Yes. Okay. What is the scholarship surrounding Abram the Hebrew, and why does it seem to be a derogatory term?
I am actually not well versed on this, so I wish I could give you a better answer, but I am not sure. I can definitely look into it, but yeah, that's not necessarily something I've looked into.
All right. So we have slightly off topic. Do you deal? I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. Do you deal with the Kabra Nagas, also Solomon and Sheba?
Okay, so no, I do not. Interestingly, I have been getting some feedback from, like I said, the African scholars, and one of them wants me to include a gender aspect, which I want to as well. I'm just trying to figure out how to put it in there, and so that was one of the suggestions. I don't know if I will explore it, but it is definitely a possibility.
And so because Solomon's name is up on the screen, and I know that's who you're focus on, for those of us who may not be familiar with the revival, in terms of Solomon and Josiah, do they show similar models, or are they different in how they construct ruling and power?
Okay, so a little bit different, especially with how they're spoken of. So with Solomon, I think you have a lot more, it's not as transparent what he's doing within the Hebrew Bible, like with the practices, like I mentioned, the district governors, but also when he gives land, the 20 cities to the king of Tyre, it's just kind of thrown in there and then we go past it. It seems like the writer has the agenda of, okay, this is what Solomon did wrong. He had all these wives and it affected his politics, but there are other things that Solomon did incorrectly that we need to critique as well. So with Solomon, it's not as transparent. His link to like colonization and, colonial studies might not be as transparent. With Josiah, I think it's extremely transparent. It's just that the biblical writer sees it as a positive thing. And so coming, and having to critique that is maybe not as difficult in academic circles, but if my audience, which I hope it is, if my audience is like the non-academic audience, then that might cause some tension.
All right. So
that's the nice way I can put it. Coming from a church background, I'm just painfully aware, like certain words that you can't use. But yes, Josiah is challenging in that way.
Oh man, yes, we loved not being able to say exactly what we're trying to say. So doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat. So with that, I will give you an opportunity to add anything that you want to add. If there's anything about your research that you didn't get a chance to share, or anything that you were hoping to talk about that we didn't ask you about, now's the time. The floor is yours.
Okay, I think I mainly want to say thank you guys for this program. This is amazing, and I'm grateful that there's not like a laundry list of things to do to to be considered, because that takes a lot of time. So deeply appreciative, and hope that I have the opportunity to go to South Africa, present, and get feedback, and maybe later on come to the channel and let you guys know how that went, what the feedback was. But yeah, overall, thank you guys so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of your wonderful research and about your background. We hope we'll have you on the channel again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Have a great day, Sarah.
You too.
Bye.
All right, y'all, we're going to take a break for a few minutes, and we'll come back with our last candidate at 1 o'clock in about 8 minutes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to get going a few minutes early with our next guest, and please welcome John to his HAPS interview. Welcome, John. If you could tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you're studying.
Yeah, great. Very, very nice to meet you guys and happy to be here. I am in Austin right now. So I'm at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm a PhD student in Hebrew Bible. I'm in my third year, so not quite at the dissertation phase yet. And my interests are kind of in the book of Leviticus. I've worked some on, how scripts and objects are part of religion and identity or national kind of identity. And then I have a couple kind of linguistically oriented projects, which is the one I'll be talking about today. So.
Awesome. So with that segue, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you plan to do this summer?
Yeah, so the project I'm working on this summer is basically one about how languages change. So in English, for example, if we saw something that said thee and thou, right, we would say, oh, those are really old archaic words and something must have been written a long time ago. Of course, there's a caveat that sometimes people just say stuff like that to sound old, and the same kind of thing is happening in the Hebrew Bible probably, where like if I said, it's nice to meet thee, Sarah, and I was, using all these terms, I'd probably use them incorrectly because I don't really know how to use them. I don't know their function really. I would just throw them in because I want to sound old-fashioned. So the Hebrew Bible is probably written over a period of a few hundred to maybe, 1,000 years, depending on who you talk to. And a big interest to scholars is, when these books might have been written. And some books are easy to tell, like if a book says, the Edict of Cyrus, let us come back and rebuild the temple. And Cyrus says, this Persian king says, I made an edict doing this. We're like, okay, it's probably in the 500s, whatever, that was written. But some books are harder. And so people have come up with different strategies to figure out when books are from. So there's this certain construction, and there's a certain construction in Hebrew where you can say, you can use a participle, and you can say like, John is going to a Cat Stevens concert. It's a lifelong dream of mine. Anyway, so in English, we need a subject there, a John, or he or she is going to this concert. And in Hebrew, you usually do have that too, but sometimes you can just drop the John or the he or she is going somewhere. And there's enough information with the way Hebrew works that you can figure out from context what's going on there. And a lot of people in the field thinks that this only happens in much, much later text. And so when they see this in text, they say, oh, this is a feature of the late phase of the language, and the text we're looking at is late because it has this. The problem is that's just not true. That people kind of parroting that are just parroting this one scholar who's written about that. And I was maybe almost a year ago, I was reading through some text after having read about this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a ton of these. What's going on? So what this project will do is just look at all the books in the Hebrew Bible and figure out kind of how frequently this construction happens. I've done about a third of it, the Hebrew Bible, including some books we know are late and some books we know are early. And we just see a pretty even amount of this construction, which means that we can't use the absence or the presence of this construction to tell if a book is late or early. So I've done that, and I will be sort of continuing to do that with the rest of the Hebrew Bible and refining some parts of this project, like, trying to figure out how you study a language that's only preserved in one small, book. So things like that. How do you make meaningful comments about that? So that's kind of the one part of the contribution. The other part is that the scholar who's written on this is this guy named Jan Houston, and he was in the news a couple years ago for having a lot of child pornography, and it was a whole big, really sad thing. And it kind of sparked a lot of conversations in our field about, what's the relationship between scholarship and the way people do their personal lives. Is good scholarship completely separate from that? And can we say it doesn't matter what people do? Or is there a relationship, right? And people are in disagreement about this, of course. But the problem is that, he's been the main guy who's written on this topic, and he's a very senior scholar, has had very prestigious positions, and he's a good scholar. But his works on this topic have not had any kind of meaningful data. He'll basically just say, this happens later, and it's a late feature, and here's 3 examples of late, and it never happens in earlier books, and the one example we do see may have some kind of textual issue, and that's that. And people are like, great, this never happens in early books. And so reading through it, I realized this happens a lot in early books, and there are some later books that it happens less frequently in than in the earlier books. And so it doesn't seem to be a feature that is that helps us to date the language. It just seems to be some kind of literary feature. So part of this project is trying to push back and say, listen, no matter a person's kind of status in the field, we have to have academic standards. If we want to make a point, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. You have to have data to kind of support what you're saying, and you can't just use the status of your position to get people to agree with you or parrot kind of what you're saying. So this project tries to make contributions kind of on both fronts there.
Trying to, make pushback and make a contribution at a time when you feel like it is a great time to do that, to push back against the person and his scholarship.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the people defending him go on to say, like, he's such a great scholar. And he has had a lot of really important works, but a lot of stuff that that also is kind of lacking in data, which doesn't always mean he's wrong. But, if you say something, you need to have, a meaningful amount of data to back it up. And of course, a lot of us are wrong, and positions change in the field. But yeah.
And speaking of data, you said you've gone through about a third of the Hebrew Bible. How long did that take you?
It took a very long time. It was very, very laborious. So, one of the things that would really help with this, the HAPS scholarship is buying some software syntax packages that will help me do that. The way I've kind of organized the data and measure the frequency isn't quite the most ideal way to do it. I still think I can show that, we see pretty equal amounts in earlier versus later text, but I've had to do a lot of work just, verse by verse, tracking these things. And there are some, similar constructions that we have to kind of figure out how to tell what's going on. So there's some complications, but it's been a lot of manual work the old-fashioned way.
So there's not like an existing tool online where you can go and say, oh, I want all the instances of this construction. It has to be done manually.
No, there are some ways. So it's with a participle, which is like, a lot of English words like with ing are participles. And we like he is going as a participle. And in Hebrew, you have participles used in the same way. So you can search all the participles in Hebrew, but the problem is you have a ton of them that have that subject, or the participle is used as an adjective like we do in English. So it just brings up like tens and tens of thousands of results. It's hard to find the ones that you're looking for. So
the classic problem of trying to tell the computer exactly what you need, but needing to go through on your own.
Yeah.
Units of the computer.
Yeah, so you can tell it well. So in Hebrew, these types of forms, they have a gender and a plural or singular marker, and you can tell it, well, don't show me any participles that have a he or a she right next to it, because then we know it's he is going to the Cat Stevens concert, and we know that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the ones that lack the he or she. So you can tell it not to find those. And that helps, but still, there are points when I've searched through, 6,000 results that I'm trying to comb down through.
Well, we have a related audience question. Are there good Bible search tools to find grammatical constructions like the Perseus project exists for Greek?
Yeah, so I use something called Accordance. It's a software. There's a couple other software tools. It's a very good resource, and it's helped me a lot. It's helped me narrow down from tens of thousands of results to 5,000 results or something like that. But there is a couple different syntax packages that I'm hoping to purchase that will help a lot with finding these. And then what I want to do, I don't know how to do this, but I want to, find when people are speaking. I think maybe this construction is more common when people are speaking. And also, I want to be able to track how many sentences or like subject verb kind of clauses that a book has as a way to kind of figure out the frequency. So I need a couple tools to help me with that. There are some good tools, but some of them have problems too. And usually the problems of these types of tools are exactly around the types of things you're searching for, because they're hard. And so people have maybe labeled them in ways you wouldn't or you disagree with. And any kind of syntax thing is only as good as the people kind of going through the text and tagging it. So the hardest ones and most interesting ones are the ones that people don't know how to deal with them always. So that's a really good question.
It sounds like your work will make not just a scholarly contribution, but also a data contribution. Do you have plans to sort of share what your list of what you've come up with, maybe pushing back on some of these tags that you find and done by other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did kind of, just for a seminar paper, I did a version of this project looking at just a select amount. And so in my paper, I included every single instance in all the books I covered. And when I do this whole project and turn it into some kind of article, I will include a list of, a comprehensive list of everything. But I do also plan to just email the people at Accordance if there's any discrepancies. So as I've searched for these, I've run across issues with some of the software things, and they're not huge issues, but they're little things. And I think the way the software gets to be as good as it is when everybody's contributing. So yeah, I mean, once I'm kind of done with this, I will get in contact with some of the people who have made those modules and say, here are some that I would, push back and say we should change these, and hopefully that'll make the resource even better for future people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your data and your work could stand to help a lot of people as they navigate this resource. So I want to go back a little bit to the sort of, archaizing language, pretending to be old. Is it how difficult is it to tell whether someone is trying to sound antiquated or whether it actually is?
That is such a good question. And, a lot of ink has been spilled arguing about this. You have some people say that all these texts were written in the late Persian period and they were really good writers and they could just write something that sounded really old. And they could just throw in a bunch of old sounding words. And then other people say, well, yeah, you can throw old sounding words. So, I don't know archaic English words, but if I just started throwing out archaic English words, it might trick some people, and some people think, well, this is a very old letter that is written here that we found. But people who were kind of historical scholars of English would look at it and say, no, the syntax is different here. You can't fake the syntax. And so it seems to be the case that you can fake some verb forms and you can fake certain words and things like that. But syntax gets really hard to fake because we don't. That's a thing that's not as preserved as well. I mean, dictionaries preserve old words, but they don't always preserve all these old ways of using them. And then when you can't go back and ask somebody from 500 years ago how you use this word or if this construction is correct or grammatical. So it can be really, really challenging. And it's especially challenging because we can't talk to anybody who's spoken any of these languages. And the place that we're pulling all our data from, the Hebrew Bible, is a pretty small kind of corpus. So yeah, it's a really good question. It's a hard topic. It is.
And I imagine that's what's sort of driving a lot of this sort of research in the middle, at least how I'm thinking about it in my head, because you mentioned there's books where we know they're older, books that we know are newer, but then there's this sort of middle ground where we're not so sure. I'm sure a lot of scholarly arguments about that, and maybe it's something that will never be settled.
Yeah, that's totally true. So, like I said, there's some books that are really clear that they're newer books. There's some that are pretty clear that they're older, and of course, with anything, there's always a small amount of people who completely disagree and have their own ideas. But it's that middle step that we're looking for. So the things that I looked at are the books that we easily know are old and easily know are less old. And I took this guy, Houston. I took the ones that he said are old and new, and I said, all right, great. I'm going to work with the ones that you said are clearly old and new because they have or they lack these features, and I'm going to look at those books. And then from there, I'll look at the books that are tricky to figure out. But what's clear enough to me is that that this is really prevalent in early books and prevalent in late books, and so it can't be used as a way to tell if a book is early or late.
And so what are some of the other features that you think should be relied on or have been relied on outside of what you're looking at?
Specific words are one of them. So if you see all these Persian loan words in a text, the Israelites don't seem to be in contact with, the Achaemenid or the Persian Empire before that empire kind of starts crushing people and defeating the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So when you see a bunch of Persian words, that's pretty obvious. But if you see just one word, it's not so clear. So a lot of people think that some of these texts were, later updated in just a few words that are stuck here and there. But I think, one of the most important things is syntax. So you'll see certain orders of certain types of words, especially with prepositions, the way you can use certain prepositions or other kind of words that aren't nouns or adjectives, but these kind of building block words. The way that those are used are not so easy to fake.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Just a reminder for those of you watching, if you have questions for John, feel free to drop them in the chat because I would love to ask your questions, even though I have many of my own. So we'll jump in with this audience question. So interesting, is there an open source software available and what's it called?
There is one kind of, let's see. I thought I had it on my phone pulled up. Yes, you can find, there are lots of websites that show you, that break down all the parts of a verse, like Blue Letter Bible or stuff that pulls up like Strong's Concordance and will show you everything. There's something called, well, there's one website that's basically like a database, and I'm struggling to remember what it's called. But it's just a long list of lines and parsings underneath it. It's called Biblia Lexa something. I don't know. I'll think about that. Okay. Yes. Thank you. I will email you. I'll figure out later what it's called. It's something I just learned about, actually. I was at a conference telling a friend about this, and he told me about this resource. So I will definitely add that once I pull it up.
Yeah, if you let Megan know, we can add it to the description after the video afterwards. So we have another audience question. How do you tell the difference between a post-exile write and a post-exile rewrite?
That's such a good question. I don't think you always can. I think we just have to admit that we can't always tell sometimes. And as I was saying, lexicon or specific words are a great way to tell when a text was written. If you see a bunch of Persian words in one text and none in another, but if you see one or two in another text, that becomes really hard because you could say, well, it has this Persian word, so clearly, it's a late book. Or you could say, well, we know that sometimes they seem that the scribes who are copying these texts out, it seems like when they're copying them out, sometimes they'll change a word because something doesn't make sense to them, or they want to update a word or something like that. So I don't think we can always tell. A lot of people are more optimistic about it than I am, and they have very lengthy works talking about a word or two or a verse or two. And I think that's a little too speculative for me. So I don't think we always can. And I think we just have to admit that we don't always know, and maybe we'll know in the future. But I think with what we have right now, we just can't always know. Sorry for a bummer of an answer.
No, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, audience, keep the questions coming. You're asking great questions here. And, because at least I've encountered this many times with people in my life, when you go so deep down the rabbit hole or something, it's often people look at you and go, why? And so I go on all the way back to the beginning. What got you interested in studying the Hebrew Bible in the first place?
Well, I was in college and I was just taking like a intro to the, Old Testament type class. And once I realized, I mean, I had grown up kind of in a religious setting where people told me that because God said that the earth was made in 7 days, it was made in 7 days. And in this, in this class, I realized, oh my goodness, there's all these people all around Israel who have stories about floods, who have stories about creation. And it was so interesting to me that the way that these texts are reworking kind of this ancient Near Eastern backdrop they're in, but also that there's all kinds of weird text in the Bible. I hadn't really realized that. So, you have a lot of texts where God's a terrible person. I mean, he's, God's the bad guy in some of the texts. Or you have texts where people are crying out to God and saying, why are you doing this to me? Why are you, why are you so horrible? And why have you made my life so horrible? Or you have texts that, say, God is good, and people who like Proverbs, if you, rise early and work hard, everything's going to work out. And I was just struck by how much, in any time or place of life, life feels like that. Sometimes it feels well ordered, and sometimes it feels like everything is against us. Or, like Job, everything goes wrong for Job, despite being a really great guy. So sometimes it feels like, life is great, and sometimes it feels like no matter what we do, things are working against us. So what was so interesting and compelling to me about it was that these texts are people who are experiencing all kinds of different, kind of the range of human experience. And I was just struck by that these people are not so different from us. And
They're just stories about people, right?
Yeah, they're just stories about people. Yeah.
So a clarification on the earlier software question. The audience member is looking for open source software where people can contribute.
Oh yeah, that's a great. So yeah, I'll link the thing or I'll send the thing that I mentioned. I'm not sure about how you contribute to that. Yeah, I know that for the some of the Bible softwares, I know if you're on the oh, you know what? There's a tagging project too. I'll think of the name of that too. There's a project where people are going through and tagging the Hebrew Bible, which basically just means that they are looking at a word and telling you if it's a verb or a noun, and what part of the speech it takes up and things like that. So yeah, I'll do both of those things.
And even if you encounter a software option where it doesn't seem like there's an obvious way to contribute, like John mentioned earlier, he plans to just email them and say, hey, I have something to contribute. Usually folks who are putting together open source software like that are really glad to have the extra help. So
yeah. Yeah, and these things like Logos or Accordance, which are probably the two most popular Bible softwares that people use, on their forums too. That they have moderators that will look at stuff people say and fix stuff based on issues people find. So even the like packaged or ready kind of completed projects are still an ongoing thing. Yeah.
So it looks like we are about done with the audience questions. So before I let you go, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share with us anything that you wanted to that you maybe didn't get a chance to talk about today.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for having me on here. I love talking about this. I hope I convince people that this linguistic thing is a little more interesting than this nerdy project that I know it to be. And yeah, I'm thankful for all the things the channel does and the way that the channel kind of hosts or facilitates really interesting conversations for people that are kind of working through understanding what the ancient world is about. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Awesome. Okay, hang on. 2 more questions are coming. All right, so do you think that it's potentially strange that the word 🀭Sheet is cognate to 𝀭Support, but the 🀭Sheet contains the consonant ordering for the root for the word for net?
The consonant ordering for the word for net. That's not something I know a lot about. One interesting thing is sometimes you see words that clearly seem to be cognates, and you just see the order of some of the consonants switch. So what this person is gesturing towards is that Semitic languages are based on kind of consonants, usually kind of sets of 3 consonants, and you stick in different vowel patterns to do different stuff to make it a verb or a noun. So like in Hebrew, you have this one word, simla for cloak, and simla and salna, and the L and the M just switch somehow, and it's the same SLM and SML. So you have that kind of stuff happening. I don't think that that's means net. I don't know what the etymology of Bereshit is. It doesn't have a definite article, so we always translate it in the beginning, but it's just in a beginning, which is interesting. But I'll have to look more into the Akkadian cognate. Thank you. That's a good question.
All right. And so we have someone who is telling us to wait for a question, so we'll see. Yeah. Asking for some clarification on a question. Of course, it's, when you start to be like, oh, we're almost done, but like the questions come in.
I can already tell this is not going to be a question I'll be able to answer. So.
Also, if you feel like you can't answer the question or it's outside your realm of expertise, feel free to say that.
I'll just say I saw at the beginning of this slide that you work at Hamilton, which is awesome. I was just in Hamilton, and it's quite a fun little city. Clinton.
Yeah, I just started at Hamilton in September. I have a PhD in Assyriology, but decided I wanted to do some digital scholarship stuff instead. So that's where I'm at the library there.
Okay, great. Nice.
All right, final question. How can you tell the difference between a rewrite post-exile and fresh post-exile? I guess grammatical clues, maybe?
Yeah, there can be grammatical clues. One of the issues with the thing I'm working on with this participle you have without a clear subject is it does seem to be more common in Aramaic, later dialects of Aramaic and later dialects of Hebrew too. The problem that I'm trying to raise is that, yes, if you kind of see what seems like to be a progression going on here, we do see it in later Aramaic and late Hebrew, like after the Bible. But I'm trying to say that we don't actually see the evidence for it in the Hebrew Bible. It can be really tempting to want to make kind of evolutionary arguments to say that these things evolve like this, and languages do change and they shift. But just because we can kind of make a guess how they shift or know how they shift doesn't always mean that the data is actually there. So yeah, grammar clues is a great part of it, and that's really, really tricky, as I mentioned earlier, because we can't talk to speakers of this language and we can't say, is this grammatical? Is this grammatical? And what people do now in linguistics for modern languages, especially languages that aren't very well studied or have small remote people groups that speak them, they do something called language solicitation, and they just they ask them a bunch of questions in the language, and they say, is this grammatical? Is this grammatical? And the people just have a sense for it, and they say yes, no, no, yes, and they they tell the linguist how the language works or what things work and don't work. So we can only see grammatical clues from the text that we have. And then, of course, as you mentioned, it's hard to tell if there's rewrites going on. A lot people really seem to want to avoid rewriting text because we later get this idea that these texts are holy and God's speaking in a lot of these texts. So we can't change what God says, and so people try to avoid editing these texts. But a little bit of editing does happen, and so it's just kind of up to people to try to figure out how much we can tell. So it's a great question. It's a question this project is working on, but a lot of people have been working on, and it's been a long kind of a long-standing issue in the field. So yeah, thanks for asking that.
All right. So with that, we will let you for real because we have time. Thank you so much for joining us, John, and best of luck on this mammoth project. We hope you find something really interesting.
Thank you. You have a good one.
You as well. All right, y'all, thank you so much for joining us for these interviews. Remember, if you would like to vote on who you think should get one of the HAPS scholarships, go to hapsfund.com and make a donation. All donors get to vote for the research they would most like to see funded. In the meantime, we'll see you back here next week for some more fascinating research from grad students.
Welcome to the Humans Against Poor Scholarship Summer Grant Interviews. Each one of our interviewees is competing for a $2,000 grant to help fund their summer research. Do you want to have a say in who gets funded? Become a HAPS donor today by visiting www.hapsfund.com/donate.